Python is all the rage nowadays, like more popular than Kim Kardashian kind of rage. And despite the fact that it's a high-level language that's pretty slow, don't let that fool you. Why? Because of how easy and productive it is to use. It turns out people like writing this a lot more than that. But what about making games? Is it just as easy? Well, a couple of weeks ago, I was itching for an excuse to make a game without an engine, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. And between it being the holidays and having a baby, I thought, what better time like the present? Get it? Now, in order to make a game in Python, you have to use a little thing called a framework. Basically, it's a library of code that does all the really hard stuff for you. And in my case, I'm using one called Pygame. Partially because it's the main one that people use, and partially because it's the only one that I know about. So I quickly installed Python on my computer, downloaded Pygame, and then spent 2 hours trying to make Sublime text look beautiful. Please tell me this was worth it. Okay, so I was all ready to get started, but it turns out I had no idea what to make. So I had my wife come up with 3 different holiday-themed themes. Next, I grabbed a 6-sided die and voila, we had a theme. Presents. I'm not gonna lie, at first I was kind of bummed. I really wanted the hot cocoa or snowman theme personally, but either way, at this point I just was excited to get started, so I jumped right into Pygame and started experimenting. My first thing was trying to draw a screen with a blue background. If I could do that, I could do anything. And it turns out I can do anything. But my blue screen was just so lonely, and I felt like it needed something, and that something was a present. So I jumped into Adobe Illustrator. Ew, I know, gross, move on. And I worked on illustrating this present character for the game. It turns out that recording yourself making art is actually incredibly awkward. At first I was so worried that I was gonna make something ugly on camera that I actually made something ugly. What is this? But I was able to power through and focus, and I ended up creating this cute little kawaii present character. I exported the present as a PNG, and then I looked at Pygame's documentation on how to draw a sprite. Of course, what's a sprite if it can't move? So I quickly made a class for the player and allowed him to move around the screen. As you can see, truly a modern piece of art. So at this point, it was pretty apparent I didn't have an idea what I wanted the gameplay to be. My goal was to keep the controls as simple as possible. The week prior, I was playing a lot of Pong, and I realized how fun that game is, even though it's such a basic, simple game. And this is where most videos like this kind of skip and just say, I figured out an idea. But honestly, it takes a lot longer than you think it does, and I kind of was racking my brain on this. But finally, after thinking about it nonstop, I thought it'd be fun if the goal of the game is you're present, and there's these hands that are trying to grab you, and your goal is just to avoid them. And it could have a fun, catchy title like Don't Touch My Present. So I jumped back into Adobe Illustrator and illustrated these cartoon hands. But these cartoon hands weren't realistic enough. I know, it doesn't make sense. So after studying my hand and re-illustrating them, I got the most beautiful Nintendo DS WarioWare style hands that I could illustrate. I also ended up mocking up the menu and creating a scorecard thing that would go in the top, so every time you get points, it would appear there. I then jumped back into Sublime Text, importing the new artwork. The main thing is I added the score. As you can see, it's working. It's okay. Slow down. Next, I created a new class for the hands, and I gave them movement. And then I added this sneaky old Flappy Bird trick that when an object is off the screen, you just reset its coordinates, so the game plays forever. There's infinite hands. Now, at this point in the game, you could only move left and right, and it felt a little stiff. So I decided to give the player 4 directional movement, and I also updated the movement so it had acceleration and friction. That way, the movement felt a little bit more floaty, and you had to control the present more instead of just like stiffly moving left and right. It was at this point I learned how to code a sine wave, and I used it literally for everything. I used it for the UI, I used it for the menu, I used it for the hands. Yes, it was totally worth it and added an extra level of polish to the game. It started to feel like I was reaching the finish line, but I kind of missed something crucial, and that's collisions. But it turns out Pygame has a really great collision system for sprites, and that was actually way easier than I thought it would be. So now when you hit the hands, the game actually resets. And it was at this point that I added probably the best feature in the game, and that's making the present not a present, but a hand holding a present. In all seriousness, it felt like the cherry on top for the game. I even made the acceleration and friction a little bit more slippery so it felt like you were controlling a hand. And this is the moment I realized that I created a game that was actually pretty fun to play. I would just open it up randomly and play it when I was talking with a friend, or I just found myself playtesting it a bunch when I was working on it when I should have been fixing some bugs. My whole goal was to make a game in Python, but I didn't expect it to actually be fun. So at this point, all that was really needed was some sound effects and some music, like this karate chop sound when a hand comes flying in fast. I also got my wife to do some professional voice acting for this as well. And originally I was planning on composing the music for it, but I was starting to run out of time and I wanted to come up with something a little bit more familiar, like a classic Christmas MIDI. And because this game felt so much like a DS game to me, why not mix this MIDI with a DS sound font? I will admit, some of the songs sound like a small walrus swallowing a car horn. This one specifically was pretty jarring, but I found out that Pokemon Heart Gold's sound font actually worked really well with a couple of tracks, and that's what I ended up using. So I added in the songs, I even randomized them, and I fixed a few bugs, and the game was done. If you want to play it for yourself, hop over to my itch.io and give it a shot. Overall, Pygame gets 2 thumbs up for me. I was able to pick it up really quickly, and it was just fun. So let me know what your high score is in the comments down below, and I just want to give a huge shout out to Electron PR, Ganger, James Albert, Remtane, Rybread, Skides, and Zulwarn, and not to mention the rest of the fantastic Patreon supporters. That's it for me this week. I'll see you next time. Peace out.